evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming out tonight. This is the April 12th meeting of the Town of East Fishkill Town Board, and this is a workshop session. Typically, a workshop session is for the board that we could sit down and talk amongst ourselves in public and discuss matters of very important matters to the Town of East Fishkill. But tonight we're doing a special presentation on hazard mitigation. So if you would first rise and join me in Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just a little bit of background on our hazard mitigation project. I believe it was probably 2006. We had a severe flooding issue. Several areas of the town were flooded. Hemlock Drive, Lake City, trying to think of the other one. There were several of them. But it was a very devastating time for a lot of people. A lot of people came into my office. At that time, County Executive Steinhaus had people come here from the county, mental hygiene, Red Cross and stuff. And it's funny, we had a crowd somewhat like this. A lot of the people, especially from Lake City, that were affected. And the question they had for County Executive Steinhaus is, what do we do about flooding? Well, the county executive really didn't have any answers. So we went further. We tried to find out who could help us with these flooding issues. And unfortunately, it was probably another 2 years later, we had another round of flooding. Lake City, Creek Bend, a lot of areas got flooded out. Again, and I'd get the people, what I'd say to the county executive or to DEC, you know, you guys don't see them. They come to my office. They've lost a lot of property. There's a lot of damage. You don't see they come into my office in tears. And they're like, well, yeah, we know. So we have pursued this for quite some time. We actually had a congressional hearing on flooding here, and I believe it was in 2007. We had a congressional hearing on flooding. Congressman Hall at that time was our congressman, and he brought two other congresspeople, and they discussed flooding, and they started a project with the Army Corps of Engineers, a research project, which unfortunately we were notified 2 years later was defunded. So that kind of fell by the wayside. But at that meeting with Congressman John Hall, I did ask, I was talking with people from SEMO. I said, what do we do about flooding? And Nadine McCura, she works for the State Emergency Management Office. She said, you really need to adopt a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan. I said, Nadine, what is that? She says, that's a plan that if FEMA approves it, they will help mitigate it. Because my problem is, I hate to keep picking up the pieces if we can prevent the losses in the first place. So we went on our way and we developed a plan. We did a lot of work with 5 other towns and villages in the area. 2008, the economy fell off the cliff. All the other towns and villages pulled out of the project. That year, we reapplied again, just for ourselves. I got the call from SEMO. Good news and bad news. You're approved for your grant. Bad news, they just defunded the program. So we were out for another year. We reapplied. And SEMO's been very good. We reapplied, and last year we got the call, you've gotten approved for the grant, the funding is there, get to work. And that's really where we are. We had interviewed previously with there were 6 of us, there was us and 5 towns and villages. We had set up, actually we had quite a few meetings, steering meetings, and we had looked at vendors, because I don't know how to do a hazard mitigation plan. So we looked around out in that field. We vetted, I think, 5 different companies that do that. Tetra Tech, we found, was a very good company. We were all very impressed with Tetra Tech. And Jonathan Racer, who was with us today from Tetra Tech, was good enough to stand by and give us advice throughout the years until we got refunded again. So we have assigned Tetra Tech the task of designing the hazard mitigation plan for the town of East Fishkill. Jonathan is here tonight. He's going to explain what a hazard mitigation plan is and what it means to us, and how hopefully it'll help us resolve some of our flooding issues, flooding and other natural disaster issues. So Jonathan.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Town Board. Again, my name's Jonathan Racer. I'm with Tetra Tech. out of Morris Plains, New Jersey. We've been contracted to go support the town with building this hazard mitigation plan. And as John explained to you, I want to talk to you tonight a bit about what hazard mitigation planning is, what the benefits of this are, what it will bring to the town, and really help to answer to you why you're here. Because we are really, the plan is here to go help the citizens as well as the town to go reduce losses to all these natural hazards. So this is pretty much an open forum, I think. If some questions come up, I'm going to talk for about a half an hour, maybe about this whole project with the slides that you have in front of you there. And I think afterwards it'll be opened up to questions and answers.
Absolutely.
So,
anybody please coming in, if you would just sign in. If you need, there's still a few more chairs over on this side.
just to make it clear what hazard mitigation planning is, it's a lot of words there, but it is one of the 4 phases of the emergency management cycle, really timed with respect to an event. Before an event comes, you prepare. We already have evacuation plans. People might learn a lot about, making your own preparedness kits, or you've got the things that you do, that bring in your furniture. If you're in flood-prone, properties, you may be bringing things out of your basement. I'm talking about things you probably do all the time. As the event unfolds, it's response. It's the lights and sirens thing. We're putting out fires. We are, putting up barriers to keep people from driving around roads and then pulling them out after they already go around the barriers. After the event passes, we're in the recovery phase, where we try to put things back together, fix things up, and hopefully apply to FEMA to get some of the losses that we suffered back, the money back in our coffers. Most of the time, though, it's a day like today where we have time to look back and look at what we've lost and try to figure out what we can do to reduce our losses the next time that this event rolls around. On the response side, we've got comprehensive emergency management planning, which covers the response and what to do as the event unfolds. On the other side, on mitigation, we build hazard mitigation plans, which are really focused on things that we can do proactively to go reduce losses. And that's what we're working on now. The problem that FEMA saw was that, and this is largely fueled by the flood insurance program, is that the federal government and towns and people find that they're cleaning up after the same mess time and time again. It costs money. Mother Nature always bats last. We have a lot of infrastructure and structures which are in harm's way, and we have to do things that we can possibly do to go remove them from harm's way, or somehow reduce the losses here. FEMA realized that that money spent in the mitigation side, reducing our vulnerability, is really money well spent. I mean, some people say that every dollar spent on mitigation comes back to $3 to $7 in a return. So FEMA has put a lot of money into the mitigation side of things, having people plan, but also having people have money available to go do projects for both public property but also private property to go mitigate. And that's what we're talking about tonight. Why are we preparing these plans? Well, to reduce our losses to natural disasters. Although the regulations that we're building this plan under require us to look at natural disasters, we can also look at non-natural disasters, and I'll talk about that a bit. It's to make our communities more like a disaster resistant. But the carrot to this whole thing is that without having a plan in place, a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan adopted by the jurisdiction, you cannot get access to these mitigation grant funding sources. And I had one handout here, which was this one. And this talks about specifically the 5 different programs which mitigation grant funding is available under. I'll go into them in some more detail there and really focus on what which is currently available for the community here. So we will talk about that. The plan provides, what does this plan provide? Well, we have to do a comprehensive fact-based assessment of our risk. We just can't go on and say that we believe we are super, vulnerable to tsunami here. I mean, we really want to look at where our real vulnerabilities lie and focus our attention on those, and build a detailed action plan. Our approach that we're going to do, the strategies that we will do at a town level and at a community level here to go bring down our risk. Obviously, it brings us access to the federal funding there. And the planning process that we do here actually supports other planning programs and initiatives. We have stormwater management programs that we have to do, and this can support that. Comprehensive planning, economic development plans can all feed into this process that we do. It's important to understand, though, right out what this plan doesn't provide. We're not going to get compensation for past losses, okay? If you suffered losses in the past and you have flood insurance, your flood insurance claim program takes care of that. If we had past losses at the public property level, public assistance took care of that. This does not start to bring in money up for past losses. This is a forward-looking program. It does not unlock funding sources beyond the ones which are on this sheet right here. Although other federal and state funding programs can supplement these like programs, having this plan only unlocks these programs right here. It has nothing to do with public assistance. It has nothing to do with if you have flood insurance, if we have a plan or not, your flood insurance is still valid, and that program is separate from it. So it also does not provide immediate funding for the projects that we identify within our plan. Although we're building a plan and a strategy with different projects in it that we would like to do and that would be eligible for funding, when FEMA approves this plan, they don't write a big blank check and say, okay, go forth and do all of those like things. Each project has to be applied for, and it has to be weighed by like FEMA on its own merits, okay? Really, really quick on the planning process. This is a planning process, and FEMA makes it very, very clear. And this is the start of it. We organize the resources. We've actually built, with some guidance from FEMA, a really good planning committee, which includes, the different, community agency representatives here, from engineering and stormwater management to obviously a supervisor and the town board, the contract planner, and some other people involved. So we have a pretty good broad representation there. But obviously we need the public to be involved and other stakeholders, because this plan benefits the community not only at the public, at the government level, but at the personal, at the resident level. So we assess the risk. We look at what our hazards are, how bad they can be, and I'll go into that quickly. Based on that, we develop our strategy, and we have to keep this plan updated and implement this plan. I'll go into that a bit. So I'll go through some of the steps, because it is kind of important. Assessing the risk is really looking at, this is an all hazards plan, although I know most of you are like here because of flooding probably, but it's not the only hazard which impacts us here. We get utility outages because of wind, ice storms, we have severe winter storms, we could have other kinds of natural hazard risks that we have to, dam failure, things like that. So we have to look at those. So FEMA wants us to look at what are those hazards which most affect us here. And we've already gone through that, and I will talk to you guys a bit about that there. And we profile the hazards. I will talk about that. We look at what do we have to lose here, our inventory, and we're in the process of putting that together. And we do a risk assessment, which says, based on everything we know and the frequency of these hazard events, what can we expect to lose? So we can then say, well, these are our most important things, so we're going to focus on how to mitigate those. Hazards of concern are those hazards which pose the most significant risk. And our effort here should be proportional to, we really should spend our time focusing on what hazards pose us the greatest risk. Obviously, in New York State, and certainly in this community, flood is a very, very high one. It is probably our highest risk and where we see the greatest amount of losses. It's not the only risk that we have, though. As we look at the hazards of concern, we came up with these as being the ones that we are, for the start of this planning project, looking at, focusing on. Flooding, severe storms, which includes high winds, tornadoes, hail, lightning, things like that, tropical storms, hurricane strength winds, severe winter storms, which includes blizzards and ice storms, extreme temperatures, dam failure, which is a non-natural hazard, but it's typically the result of natural, high precipitation levels and things, and utility failures. But utility failures is usually another impact of things like high winds, ice storms, and things. So that's how we're handling that. So Are those hazards of concern, does that seem like a reasonable suite of hazards to consider here? Given that flooding is probably our highest one? I'm just kind of curious, is there anything that's not there? Because we looked at everything. We looked at wildfire, we looked at landslide, we looked at
Earthquakes.
What's that? Earthquake, yeah. Earthquake was actually one that we looked at there. And we may include that. The reason why we may not is that oftentimes the mitigation, we really can't mitigate to that too much. We really can't do projects that are going to be mitigation. We already have in our building code seismic code. So we're already supposed to be building things. And FEMA's probably not going to pay to reconstruct a building to seismic code unless it was, let's say, a hospital, and that was found to be highly vulnerable. They may do that. So we will consider that. We will look at what the assets are within the community and see if there is really a vulnerability to it. Fortunately, most of us live in wood frame houses, which tend to just shake around, things fall off the thing, but we don't really have a lot of losses to that. But that's a good thought there. And earthquake may be pulled back in if we find that we do have vulnerabilities to it. So, specific ones. Good question. Hazard profiling, we look at where our risk zones are. Certainly with flooding, we know we have NFIP floodplains, the 100-year floodplain or the 1% chance. We also know that flooding happens outside of floodplains. It could be because of stormwater management issues or just because mapping is not perfect science. So we're spending a lot of time with the community to go identify all of the flood hazard areas and other hazard areas that we have. We look at the background, we look at the past events and losses in there. We've actually, one of the reasons why a lot of you are here, because you probably got a letter, we identified you as being a NFIP policy holder. We have all the policy statistics on all these policies, which we will keep quite confidential there, but it allows us to really assess where the real problem areas are, who has seen the most losses, at least FEMA paid losses. We want to identify all losses, understanding a lot of people don't have to carry flood insurance or haven't made claims. So we have to identify all those areas there. So that's what we do. Assessing the risk, we really inventory all the assets too. We look at what, the population and demographics that we have here. We look at the general building stock. We have a very good inventory of all the properties here, their value, where they're located, in floodplains, outside of floodplains, age of construction. We look at all other things such as infrastructure, our roads, our lift stations, wastewater treatment plants, utilities such as switching stations, things like that, lift stations. And we look at critical facilities, our police, our fire, our schools, our government buildings there, and dams, water impoundments. So we're looking at, so we built a very good inventory, or are building a very good inventory of the town, not only as to what is vulnerable, but everything which is here. So we're in that process right now. After we understand our hazard zones and our inventory, we can really overlay them and really understand that what do we predict our suffering, our losses will be if we don't do anything further right now to go mitigate our losses. And a lot of that is expressed in things like with the return intervals, such as we talk about our losses to the 100-year flood event, which is, I would prefer people to start thinking about the 1% chance in every year. People think that just because the 100-year flood happened last year, we could wait another 100 years. It's just a matter of chance. It could happen the next year, and it has been happening, as people know. So don't let that fool you. So people talk about the 1% chance. I mean, you can win the lottery. You can get 200-year floods in a year. So, so that's what the risk assessment portion is about. After we understand what our risk is and what our troubles are, we move forward on looking at, well, what can we possibly do about it? What do we want to do about it? What is feasible for us to do? Irrespective of funding, we all understand that the almighty dollar is our biggest deterrent to being able to do a lot of the things that we want to do. But these federal funding programs that can help bridge that gap. So the big part, and we really started looking at potential projects right from the start. I mean, in our first meeting, we really didn't go lockstep and say, well, let's talk about our hazards and let's talk about this. We said, projects, what do you guys like? Let's start talking projects right up front. So, and the reason why we want the public involved a lot is because if you've got vulnerable properties and you see that you may be eligible for these grants, or you know certain vulnerable areas or have thoughts of how, whether or not it's on your specific property, but what could be done in a more regional aspect, we want to know about your thoughts here, because that could go into the plan here. So the mitigation action identification is really a whole ongoing process. The mitigation strategy that we develop, though, it has to be realistic. It has to be something that can be done at the local level. Obviously, building a dam or something, a large dam or a whole levee system, Army Corps of Engineers really does that. It's not within the purview of a local government to go do. So we're conscious too in this planning process to look at what is Army Corps doing or planning on doing, what is the state, what is DOT planning on doing. So we have to bring that all into the equation so that we're not spending money in areas that which are going to be mitigated in other ways. So that's a very important part. But in this mitigation strategy, we're looking at things that address not only public property, infrastructure such as drainage things or roadway elevations or conveyance improvements, but we're also looking at private property projects that can be done here through this project. So, and as we identify these mitigation projects, we really want to define them well. What's the cost? What's the benefits? Benefits mean what is our what losses are we avoiding? What money will the feds not have to pay out, or else the town not have to pay out in the future for that project? What's the timeline? Who is the person who's going to be the lead agency on that one? Supporting agencies. Obviously, a lot of these projects, even though the town wants to do it, it could involve permitting. That could involve the DEP. There could be other agencies involved, and I'll talk some more about that. Mitigation actions fall, though, in a number of different types. It isn't just doing a dam or a levee or else a culvert improvement. We have prevention things, such as our planning and zoning, or building code is here as a mechanism to help us build things in the right way, to not make, to not build things in the wrong way. We know that fire code, before fire code, we had structural fires all the time. Fire code came out. Structural fires have dropped almost nothing, in the whole grand scheme of things. So code and ordinances and things like that is one of the most effective, and planning like this is one of the most effective ways to go mitigate, to manage natural hazard risk. Property protection measures, and I'll go into this more, can be things like acquiring the most vulnerable properties and removing them from the risk area. Elevating properties above like the base flood elevation. Doing certain structural retrofits to things, hardening things. If it was a school or something, wind-resistant glazing, improved roofs, things like that, wet-dry flood proofing. Public education and awareness is a very, very important part of this thing, because in the end, the federal government doesn't have enough money and the town does not have enough money to go make everybody safe. A lot of things have to be done at your own personal level to go protect yourself. And a lot of that is explaining to people and getting more outreach as to, one, how you can help yourself or protect yourself, but also to make you aware of federal grant programs such as the ones that we are talking about with this. So that's why the public education and awareness is so big. Natural resource protection, as you probably know, if we can keep our natural stream courses and stream banks in check and keep natural detention and impervious surfaces intact, it can help to attenuate or mitigate a lot of the problems that we have. The more we lose those resources, the more we end up getting clobbered every time. So a lot goes into that. Emergency services are things about seeing things coming, warning systems. I mean, we've got reverse 911, we have New York Alert, different ways that you guys can get, the word that, there is problems. I mean, National Weather Service does a great job, probably too good a job at times. It's almost like scaring us all the time. And then there's structural projects, which are the larger things, dams, levees, dikes, which are more in the Army Corps side of things. So, but the mitigation actions that we look at fall along a broad spectrum of activities there. When it comes to doing private property mitigation, I will tell you that a lot of the money in these grant programs on private property fall into two main areas. It is acquiring properties in the most vulnerable areas, okay? You get fair market value for your property, the property is moved out of that, and the property there goes into open space in perpetuity. That's called an acquisition. It can be also relocating these structures. Sometimes they will actually pay to have the whole property lifted and put somewhere else, or even backed up on the property itself. Acquisition has a lot of some issues with it on the property owner side. They're saying, what is fair market value? I don't want to leave the town. I got to buy myself back into the town there. I don't want to leave. Towns don't like to lose rateables. That's just a fact. So there's some issues with that. So that is a bit of a tricky business, but in times you find that there are certain properties that are just so vulnerable and getting hit so hard, and people have gotten, all you have to do is get hit 2 or 3 times in a row, and the person who says, I'm never gonna leave, is like, I want out. So we have to address people like that. I mean, that situation, and really, I mean, FEMA has a very high priority towards getting properties completely out of the vulnerable place. So, and a lot of money goes for that. So, elevation is where you reduce the vulnerability of the property, okay, by bringing it up above the flood zone, okay? The water will still be around you, but you may not suffer damage for that level of event. There's always some level of event that will tag you, but that will reduce your vulnerability there. So that's what elevation is. A lot of the money in these FEMA programs for private property go into acquisitions and elevations. Public education and awareness, though, and part of this project, we're going to spend a lot of time hoping that people understand the National Flood Insurance Program. It is not a perfect program. I'm not going to do anything to go, be a rah-rah champion of it. It is an effective way to help people cover potential losses there. A lot of people don't understand what the flood insurance program is. They don't carry it either because they don't carry a mortgage. But people do have to understand that it is available, and in certain situations, in many situations, especially if you're in flood-prone areas, it is important to have. People think there's a lot of misunderstandings about it. People think that your homeowner's policy covers flooding. It doesn't. People have to understand that. So, but there's other things that we want to do as far as public education there, and part of it is too making people aware of the different mitigation grant programs which could be available, and a lot of the reasons why we're here. This plan obviously has to integrate with other community and state plans. We have comprehensive emergency management plans that this plan has to dovetail with. We have comprehensive planning, which talks about zoning and land use, and it's very important that natural hazard risk will be brought into the general planning process there. So we want this plan to complement the other planning processes within the town. For instance, let's say the town is thinking of doing economic redevelopment in like a certain area. We're not going to say that you can't do it there because it could be flood prone, but you have to take that risk into account so that any development done there is done appropriately, so that we're not increasing our risk. So we have to look at other plans and respect the other goals and objectives of the town. Capital improvement plans are very important. The town already has a lot of projects on the books over the course of the next 5-10 years, which they intend to bond or use taxpayer funding for. Some of these plans, some of those projects in there could be mitigation related, which means that we could get a large portion of those projects paid for through these programs. So we want to look at those capital improvement plans and try to say that is a really good grant eligible project. Let's work on getting that funded by FEMA rather than all by ourselves. Plan implementation. Once we get this plan put together, it goes to FEMA, it gets approved by them, adopted by the community by resolution. We want to work on this. We want to start doing these projects which we talk about. In general, there are 2 kinds of projects in there. The ones that we can fund under our existing budgets, because it could be public education outreach, it could be certain code enforcement things, make sure that we're enforcing our codes in this area. We already have budgeting for that. It could be some stormwater projects that we already have in the books that's already bonded or funded for, so we do those. A large portion of those could be projects that we don't have funding for, that we want to try. So we have those 2 types of funding. And as I say, the funding programs are discussed in there. They fall into 2 general kinds. There is an annually funded program which covers 4 different of the mitigation grant funding programs. That is federally appropriated up by Congress. And I'm a little bit concerned that those grant funding programs will probably get less funded because we're trying to get a smaller government and this is one of the losses that we're going to suffer. But that grant funding window opens up in June, and the applications have to be in by the end of the year. One of the more useful funding programs, however, is the Hazard Mitigation Grant program, which is disaster-driven. Unfortunately, it's the silver lining to state-declared disasters. Every time we have a state-declared disaster, 15% of the cost of that disaster goes into a grant funding pool, which is available to anybody within the state to go tap into. After Irene, Lee, and the event between that, leading up to the October 29th snowstorm, we're talking about, I think, a $1.5 billion event, which means $150 million of money. $150 million is now available in a grant funding pool in a currently open offering to all communities within New York State to go put in for projects there, if you have a hazard mitigation plan in place. So that's why we're doing this. Mitigation grant programs, let me talk about these a bit so that people understand. There's no free lunch, and this is true in this case too. There are hurdles to it, and it's not a perfect system, but it's pretty good for what it does. It can fund projects on both public and private property. It generally funds 75% of the project costs and requires a 25% local share, okay? In rare cases, it can be a 90-10 split, okay? But that 25% local share, if it was a town project, the town would actually probably have to come up with its own 25% out of the general budget there, okay? If it's for private property, it's reasonable to expect that the benefactor of that has to come up with the 25% for the mitigation, okay? Sometimes the state picks it up for certain reasons. Sometimes things like, in the case of acquisitions, which means the property goes into open space, like Green Acres or Blue Acres kind of funding or DEP funding can pick up the 25%. But that is usually just, it's project specific, and it is grant offering specific, such as for this certain HMGP offering, which is now under Irene and Lee, it's got certain parameters of which I'll talk about that. But as I said, acquisitions for private property they have a strong preference towards acquisitions for the most flood vulnerable property, but elevations certainly count. But also public projects are also fundable under this. Projects must be identified within this plan, and it's very important that we identify them. We understand, however, that private property owners will not necessarily say, I want my property to be in this public document and say at 293 East Glen Road, I want, I'm flood vulnerable and getting whacked all the time. I want my thing to be specifically spelled out in there, because you have the right to your own privacy about your property as well. So we will write some general initiatives in there talking about as private property owners come forward and show interest, the town will support working towards getting mitigation. So don't worry that your property has to be specifically by like address put in there. When I ask for people to put down addresses here, and I do want to understand who you are, it's only because the only way we can talk to you is about your property specific. This is a public document, however, and I can assure you that there will be no information in this public document that will jeopardize private residents' privacy there, okay? So make that quite clear. The projects that we do must be an eligible mitigation project, okay? If you want to, and I think this document talks about what an eligible activity is, however. So we will be talking to people, and some people have some ideas of what they want to do, and we have to tell them that's just not an eligible. They're not going to fund it. That's not the kind of thing they fund. And bear with the program understand that when we say that, we're not making that up. So the project has to be eligible. The project must meet certain state priorities, okay? Because when the state puts out money for HMGP or something, they can say, for instance, on this one, that although HMGP money within the state for this declared disaster is supposed to be available to anybody in the state, they can say that our priority is for those communities that were most affected by the event, and because it was a flooding event, our priority will be to go at flooding projects. And that's exactly what the case is on this one. Fortunately, Dutchess County was one of the declared counties, and flooding was one of the declared things, was the reason for that. So this is the HMGP that we're looking at right now is actually focused on communities like this and flooding. And the projects must be cost effective. And FEMA looks at a certain benefit cost thing. I mean, when we decide how to spend our own money, we look at getting the most bang for the buck. Well, FEMA does the same thing, and they've got a formula that we have to look at for these projects. What is the cost of the project, and what is the benefit on the mitigation? What is the losses avoided to it, okay? You don't just have to own flood insurance in order to show benefits. They look at benefits just being, because anybody could be a policyholder. So they don't, require that. But when you do have a flood insurance policy and you have had claims, it's very easy to go document. You really don't have to argue with FEMA that you lost this because FEMA already paid it out. So, but we have to look at benefit versus cost in these projects. Just to kind of appeal to the town here generally, here's just an example of, let's say we had in our 5-year capital program a $200,000 stormwater improvement project, which had mitigation benefits. It reduced flooding, it stopped roadway closures, and it stopped flooding to certain properties and structures there. Without a grant, that would be a $200,000 project there. Let's say it costs us something like $20,000 to go prepare a grant and submit it and do all the engineering behind that. It became a $220,000 project. If that was funded, the 75% would be $165,000. Well, the net cost to the town now, or to the property owner, is now $55,000 rather than $200,000. So it can really make some financial sense, particularly on projects that you've already been planning on doing or need to do. The current HMGP opportunity, I already talked about it, based on the last 4 events, starting with Irene and ending with the October 29th storm, has made a pool of over $150 million, it could even be more than that right now, available for communities who want to apply for that money, be it for public property projects or else private property projects. They have, in addition to getting grants for doing certain planning projects like this, the priority is for getting flood-prone properties, substantially damaged properties within the floodplain has the first priority for this. Substantially damaged is actually a formal designation that if your property has suffered losses or damage to it more than 50% of the replacement cost value of your property, you are considered substantially damaged. It is the determination which is made by your code official in general. It's nothing to be taken lightly, because once you become substantially damaged, that property, if you intend to stay in that property, it has to be brought up to whatever code is. If you were built before the floodplain codes were, in order to be able to continue to use your house, you would have to bring your property back up to whatever current code is and floodplain code is, which means elevation or stuff like that. This program here, right now, they are offering buyouts. Acquisitions is their primary thing for anybody who is substantially damaged and located within a floodplain. For those properties, you do not have to do a benefit versus cost. They take it inherently that because you've been substantially damaged and you were in a floodplain, all you have to do is say, I want out, and pretty much if you go through the paperwork and the process, and it's a process because you have to appraise your property and come up with an agreement. It's a voluntary program. If you don't agree with the appraisal amount, you can back out at any time there. But that's the #1 priority. Elevations is the second priority, which means you elevate your property up above there. You have to do a benefit versus cost for that. So you have to get an elevation contractor to give you an estimate for the cost to elevate. It's not just elevating, but it's the utilities and the cost site restoration and things like that. And we base that against the expected future losses. And if it is a cost beneficial project, then that could be considered. For these grant programs, it's a fairly simple thing to start. If you are interested and you think you have an eligible project and you think you may be acceptable for an acquisition, I know towns don't like those, but or else an elevation, there is a letter of intent. It's a simple 2-page form which you submit to the state that says that I, property owner, am interested in this certain project that we would like to be considered, and we believe that we are an eligible project and cost effective. The state will come back and say, yep, we agree, we would like you to go submit an application for it. under this one, let me tell you that if you are a substantially damaged property and you are in the floodplain, it's going to be a very simple process to get your property probably processed through this, okay? If you're looking for an elevation, as I said, it requires that you get, that you go through the process of getting some estimates for elevating the property up from an elevation contractor. We have names of people in the area. In fact, I think the primary elevation contractor is right up in this area. People might be aware of the person. It's some of the brothers or something. Nichols Brothers, okay.
Nichols.
They have a good reputation or whatever, so apparently they do that. So, I mean, getting an estimate is probably not that big a deal, but understanding that you have to look at the cost versus benefits, and we will be quite honest as we look at this. If we say, I don't think you're suffering enough losses here that is going to be cost beneficial, you know, you kind of have to accept that too. Because in the end, it costs a lot of money to go do, it costs some money to go do an application for that, and we really want to screen properties out and be honest about it. A lot of times, some of these properties who are suffering damages could be mitigated by a more regional solution. Maybe it's just bad stormwater management in the area. Maybe it's stream clearing or snagging that has to be done. So we try to look at the holistic solution where the individual property solution is not going to work or will not be funded. Yeah, I was talking about the acquisition projects there. Primary thing being substantially damaged properties, which is a formal designation by the code official in the in the flood hazard area there. You'll learn more about that, but to kind of wrap up, there are a lot of benefits to doing this mitigation planning process. Obviously, we will reduce our cost to our emergency protective services here, having to do road closures, evacuations, things like that. Cleanup costs, obviously a lot of damage to our infrastructure, roadways, stormwater management systems. There's a lot of cleanup and debris management costs, cost to repair the infrastructure, maintenance costs. After declared disasters, FEMA comes in and they have a program called public assistance. So we can put together and say we lost all this at the town level, and we submit for an application, and they will come back and pay you and recoup some of your losses there. Unfortunately, most of the things that cost us money are not a declared disaster. We have events that happen all the time, so we can't get public assistance for that. Then we have to do a proper accounting for what we lost, and FEMA will only pay what they want to pay out of that whole thing. So you never get back everything from the government on this. Mitigation really, if you don't lose it in the first place, it's really the way to go. We're going to look at a thing called the community rating system for you policyholders within the town. This is an incentive-based program. It's a lot like the insurance programs for your fire and different kinds of town insurance, where by doing activities throughout this planning process that reduce the overall risk, we can reduce our flood insurance premiums by as much as 45%. That's unrealistic 45%, but realistically 10 to 15% we could get reductions in the town. And that benefits any policy holder, both private people, but the town owns policies too for town properties. And the MS4, the stormwater program that the town has to comply with, which can be quite onerous and expensive. A lot of these stormwater projects, the problem with these mandates that we have is, how is it funded? Well, these funding programs may be able to help support some of them. So there's a lot of different multiple benefits here. And that's pretty much what I have to say right now about the planning project and benefits. So.
Sounds good, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. I think there is no easy solution to any of these problems, and there is no 100% solution. I think Jonathan said, there's going to be a cost-benefit analysis. You're not going to be reimbursed 100%, but maybe there is something that can be had from these programs. Certainly, we're looking at it for any projects we can implement on the town level to help mitigate flooding, but there are other things that are offered to the residents. It's open to everybody, and we want to make sure it's open to everybody. So, anybody has any questions for Jonathan?
And at that point, I'm going to put a form up here. It's called a voluntary notice of intent, a voluntary notice of interest. If you are a property owner who believes you may benefit from one of these grant programs, okay, I would ask that you fill out one of these forms. It is a voluntary notice, and it all says in here that you're not committed to doing anything. The town cannot use eminent domain or anything to take over your property under this. It's all voluntary. You can back out at any time. But if we don't have this information about you, we don't know who you are and how to talk to you about your specific property. So I'm going to leave a bunch of forms up here. I didn't want to just put it up there before because you wouldn't have understood what I was asking you for. But it does ask you for your specific information about your property. And do you think you're eligible for an acquisition or else an elevation, or perhaps both? Or maybe you just want more information. But if we don't know who you are, we can't really work with you directly. So I'm going to leave forms up here, and please fill them out, okay?
Once you fill them out, where do you just leave them there?
You can leave them here. I think I put the I put the supervisor's office as a thing.
You drop them off
bring
at my office.
Drop them off at town hall or whatever if you're not sure. I think we're going to probably get these up on the website too.
Yep, we will.
So you'll have, and there's really no, I would put it in as soon as possible. The letters of intent for the certain HMGP grant opportunity right now are, there's 3 different phases. Phase 2 is the end of this month, and phase 3 is the end of next month. But these these opportunities keep cycling around. So if you're not sure now, or if we're not ready to go submit for something on your property for this grant cycle, it'll be for the next grant cycle. So, yes?
You said that the people who are eligible for the acquisition have to have been substantially damaged.
Only under this certain offering here. The priority for this is that they made it a priority, and they said you do not have to prove benefit versus cost for your project if you are substantially damaged and in a floodplain. Okay, you don't have to show that you're cost effective, which is a big issue. Okay, they just said inherently we're just going to say that you're cost effective.
What's the definition of substantially damaged?
Substantially damaged means that 50% of the replacement cost value, the cost value of your structure, okay, has been damaged, okay? So if the value, you know, if the cost to rebuild the structure of your property was $100,000, if you had more than $50,000.
Now, is that a one-time, or okay, over years and years and years and years? But
That's a good...
We have a lot of houses and a lot of development that it's not a one-time thing. It's one
Right.
getting worse as time goes on.
It's repetitive.
That is a good point.
It's a repetitive problem. It's like it
Right,
says,
well, we have
yeah.
repetitive loss, but you can actually, and this is something that we will work with the town, although the town I don't think right now has a provision within its code called cumulative substantial damage, which means it will look at if you suffered $25,000 at that one, and you suffered $25,000 that, and the structural value is 100, you've reached the substantial damage without having the one-time thing, okay? But that has to be already within your ordinance and code. We don't have that.
Don't have that yet.
What happens if you haven't made any claims?
If you haven't, you don't have to have NFIP flood claims, a history of flood. You don't even have to be a flood policy owner, okay, to be substantially damaged. Substantially damaged is an evaluation of how much damage your property has, not what you submitted for or got paid for by FEMA. When it comes to doing benefit versus cost, it's very easy to, if you have a flood claim history, to document it to FEMA because you don't have to show a whole bunch of things and prove.
Well, that was one issue that I know a lot of us ran into prior to John's administration taking over. Previous administration, there was no state of emergency declared. There was no disaster declared. We had residents that we've had flooding in the 80s, in the early 90s, and it just got progressively worse. And what happened with what you were stating there is no so-called paper trail other than the pictures and the documents that the townspeople have.
Right. And that is sometimes sufficient. Also, we can look at estimated future damages. We know based on the elevation of your structure, the elevation of your first floor there, and the floodplain there, and the frequency, we can actually estimate future losses, anticipated future losses. We can write down about your loss history as much as you can document it. We certainly can talk about this property had, 6 inches of water in 1980. It had 3 feet of water on the first floor and there. So you can document it that way. The only thing with the substantial damage for this is that you don't have to show benefit versus cost, which just removes a whole lot of the documentation. It's a very fast-track way to do it. It's not to say that you can't do this if you're not substantially damaged with that declaration. But you
Excuse
just
me,
have
could
to
I-
show benefit versus
If I may,
cost.
just really quickly, Jonathan, on a couple different things. I think what you're saying about the acquisition, if it's substantial, a lot of the hurdles go away, but you
Right.
could still
You
apply.
can still apply, right.
And it
right.
would be considered.
Right.
Number two, none of this really works until we have a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan.
This is true.
So although we're talking about this today, our target date to have the plan approved by FEMA is really going to be sometime late autumn or the winter time, something like that.
Right, but as we talk with the FEMA representative, you're not precluded from submitting a letter of intent or getting into the system or even putting
Okay.
together an application. You have to have a FEMA-approved plan adopted by the community at the time which they obligate the funds.
Okay.
Okay? So, I'm finding this to be a really good incentive to get people involved or interested. Whether or not you can actually get benefit out of this grant opportunity, I would encourage people to consider, try to, and also for town projects, use this as your, as a test and let's find out about this so that whether or not we can hit on this grant opportunity, there will be the next grant opportunity. A lot of this information, the interest, the people coming forward and getting this information together, getting people to understand what these grant programs, doesn't happen overnight. It takes time for people to understand what these programs are and the information which they need to collect. Okay, so I would use this as an opportunity to say, let's try to get money on this grant cycle. If we can't, we'll get it on the next grant cycle.
Okay.
There will be another disaster and there will be another grant cycle.
FEMA has a program, if you're in a competitive flood zone.
Right.
And a lot of people in Waterville are. There is a grant program called ICC.
Mhm.
And if you've had more than 3 floods within 10 years, you can apply to them, and there's a grant to help raise your house. And they will give you a grant of $30,000, which I'm applying for.
Mhm.
Because I've had 2 major floods
Right.
in my home, where there's been 2 foot of water in my kitchen for the last 2 major floods, and then we had one prior to us moving in.
Okay.
The problem that we had was that when we purchased the property, because we're right on Fishkill Creek,
Yep, we know where we are.
the insurance company had us rated as a flood zone C. But we find out through a hydro engineer that the property's never been in a flood zone C. It's always been an 89.
Okay.
So now we have that issue. But, they've raised our premium, it's been a mess. But now, because of this, we have severe structural damage to the house, where the beams in part of the house are now cracked and on the crawl space floor. This is no basement. We are now fighting with the insurance company because they're telling us that it's a pre-existing condition because of repetitive flood damage. Well, 6 months prior to Lee and Irene, they weren't laying on the floor, and they were there then, and now they're having this big lawsuit with them and with the insurance company. The bottom line is that FEMA does have this other program. If you are in a repetitive flood zone,
Right.
and you can document this, because if you do have flood insurance, FEMA sends you a form every year documenting the flood damages and the claims on your FEMA policy. So, our damage on each flood has been in excess of 200,000.
Okay.
And our property has substantially decreased in value. And according to the hydro engineer, for us to take the house out of the floodplain, we have to raise the house 5 feet.
Okay.
That's based on
The
what's
floodplain
happened
elevation.
recently.
And if I raise my house 5 feet, I'll be in the tree. So then I'll have a tree house. So, the bottom line is
Seen some
that
pretty
we are
outrageous
equal with the
elevations.
tree.
Right.
And the water the last flood was in our home, and it was over our split rail fence.
Right.
Because we are adjacent to the IBM property, and all the water comes down off of that property, right onto us,
Mhm.
and to the gun club. So it just, you need a kayak,
Right.
to
Uh-huh.
get around, right? Well, there you go, you know. So there is another program, there are programs.
Right, that is right. And the increased cost of compliance can actually, if you are going to do certain things, such as an acquisition, that can cover to the 25% local share, or if you have to, I mean, increased cost of compliance is that they recognize that if you have to, if your property is damaged, and you now have to bring it into code because it wasn't into, because your house was probably pre-flood code, you know, in order to bring it now elevated up, that's an increased cost. So the FEMA, so the increased cost of compliance will give you up to $30,000 to go, in addition to fixing the property, to repairing the damage that you had, it will give you $30,000 more to go cover the cost of bringing it up. Right, that's what the 30.
But if you don't have flood insurance, and I have to be honest with everybody, even if you're not in, even if you're in a C zone, you should get it. It's not, if you're not in an A9, it's not that expensive, but you will be protected. Because I'll tell you, the worst damage in the world is when that water comes up to the floor and you're just watching it rise. I mean, it's really scary.
The one issue though that my family's having with the flood insurance, the flood insurance only will cover to a specific point. There's like a little clause in there that says, we will not cover damage to the foundation of the house of X, Y, and Z. And now the foundation of the house is shifting, the water comes into the same location, the cracks in the foundation. And there's a claim, I don't know if my wife has the same
No, I
issue.
don't.
My flood insurance, my policy has, it says in there, it's like an out clause. And we had, insurance came in and like, oh, the flood, this wasn't caused by the flooding. I'm like, well, we've had
Well, that's
10
what I'm
floods in
going
20 years.
What they're telling me is
No,
that the
it's
structural
our
damage,
question.
We don't have that clause.
we don't have, no, because they will fix the structure. They will fix construction. They will fix structure. They will do inside of the house. They won't do anything on the outside, like decks or moving that. But if you can prove that that damage was from that specific event, then you are entitled to have your structure fixed with insurance policy, because that's what flood insurance does.
And they actually, your policy,
Selective.
so we have selected, and they told us the exact opposite.
I have a very good public adjuster, so,
It was the exact opposite.
I don't recall seeing that.
no.
No, and flood insurance does not, I mean, they don't have, it's a fee, it's a federally underwritten
Right.
program. Insurers cannot add I mean, the insurance policy that you have is the same, I mean, it's supposed to cover this, the same policy. It could be that your certain adjuster is trying to do things.
The information that we're getting is
Okay.
180 degree opposite of what.
No, you, if you can prove that that happened because of that event,
Right.
let's say Lee and Irene, which I'm going through right now,
We're going through the same.
Okay.
they will pay to fix the understructure, the infrastructure. They will do that. If their engineer says that's what it was, my problem is that their engineer is telling me it's a pre-existing situation.
Okay. Yeah,
You have to battle that.
it sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah. Also understand that flooding is defined as the overland flow of water. Sometimes people have basement flooding from seeps and stuff, and you could say, well, I mean, it flooded because there was tons of precipitation. But if it wasn't the overland flow of water, if it came through your foundation up and caused damage, unfortunately, that's not called flooding under the.
We had 5 feet, 6 feet of water on the outside of the foundation. You can see where the cracks are in the foundation. From where the house is settling out.
Okay.
And Selective, they literally came in and they said, we won't cover this, we won't cover this, we won't cover this, we won't cover this.
Okay. I would like to just keep on with the hazard mitigation plan if we could, but it's very interesting about the insurance companies, but if we could,
And I can
Yeah.
tell you, John, Mom's
Yeah.
like, her stress level,
yeah.
like, it was like.
Oh, I can imagine it, yeah,
She's like,
yeah.
So the new program is really going to see benefits 2013.
What's that?
Probably by the time we adopt it. Now, we were talking about
Yeah,
this.
but I mean, but you know, it won't hurt you. I mean, you making claims under your flood insurance has nothing to do with this
The
plan.
letter's okay, but I'm saying by the time something actually happens, you're probably looking at.
Probably in the next grant cycle.
I mean,
reimbursement.
Yeah.
The only thing with the ICC plan is that we must get a letter from the town that we need to have, that this is a problem, and in order for us to give you this money,
Mm-hmm.
the town has to tell us that this will take that problem away.
Okay.
So, hello.
Gentleman was in the red, was patiently waiting.
I was wondering if you would give some specificity on a structure like a dam. Who would put in the letter of the application?
For doing what, dam rehabilitation?
Yes.
Dam rehabilitation will not be funded under this program.
Letters for a dam that we want-
Well, okay, well, that is a form of mitigation, yes, okay? But in general, when it comes to, FEMA will not, under these grant programs, pay for dam maintenance. Are you talking about maintenance and repair? Or having a new, okay, FEMA mitigation programs will not pay for maintenance. They will not pay for repair, okay? This is mitigation, that's one thing, okay? They understand that we have substandard dams, okay? And there may be other funding programs, but the mitigation programs will not fund maintenance and repair of structures, okay? When it comes to building dams as a mitigation thing, the federal government sees dams as being a potential way to mitigate, okay? But in general, we're not going to build a dam in a certain area for flood control reasons. Your dams around here are probably not so much flood control reasons, okay? Probably other reasons like that. They're probably not water supply dams. If they're water supply dams, they are probably owned by, water authorities, and they're probably inspected or.
What about, would this hazard mitigation plan allow the town to go in and remove illegal structures that have been put up to protect certain communities while protecting other ones?
I'm not,
I know there's a berm that was put up along the Fishkill Creek by certain little development
okay,
where there used to be a floodplain.
right,
Now, the water not spreading out through the floodplain ends up coming
Okay.
down. So most of us are all from Warren Drive, Loma, the Lake
Okay.
City area.
I'm familiar,
And more upstream, where everything would just spread
Right.
out into there to alleviate.
Okay.
Everything just comes down with a
this
full
is
tide.
certainly,
There
it's
was
not
a-
the first
there
I've,
was- There was a berm that was put in properly
Right.
without proper DEC,
right, Okay.
approval to protect its one location.
Right.
So that was put in. Would this have mitigation plan look at something like that?
well, yeah, no, the plan is supposed to look at all possible, and look at things that could have been done wrong or even illegally or outside of code, and consider. The question then comes into who has the jurisdiction to make, to require it to be mitigated or changed? Is that at the local level? Is that at a county level? Or is that at the state level? It's probably at a state level, but it doesn't preclude the community from appealing and bringing pressure on something being done about that.
But if this company put this berm up and diverts the water elsewhere, and there was no engineering report to tell the effects or the ramifications of this situation,
Right.
then I think that should be addressed by our town, because we are being very severely
When was this berm installed?
I really don't know. It was when that
The
development
berm
was.
that I'm specifically talking about, John, is the one on the trailer park on Pelham Road.
Okay, when was that installed about? Any ideas?
You can definitely see that there was a berm up against the side of the creek. Like I said, might have been previous year administration.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to get a year, a figure.
You can see it's not a natural.
Okay.
property
Okay.
for that.
All right. In the
Obviously,
90s,
that's
John?
against.
And but let me
floodplain
just, a little further, just the only thing I understand, anytime, this is always the problem when you're disturbing floodplains or dislocating water, and this is exactly what happens. It pushes it out of there, it's fine there, but somebody else downriver suffers.
We brought this thing
Yeah.
down to detention probably
Yep.
15 or 20 times. per
Yep,
year.
and I do believe we had contacted the DEC on this also,
Okay, well, it can continue to be in.
because this is not,
and-
this is a
and
DEC issue.
And this is crucial to our livelihood.
Right.
We pay taxes, we
And this is an example of a more regional or like holistic solution where, you know, if you can't mitigate your own specific property, can you find the solution in the area that improves it for more properties?
Look, I wish I could put up a dam between me and IBM because the water comes right over my road and washes out my road. I've had my road replaced 3 times.
Okay.
Then I'll get to you.
You guys have done the assessment.
Excuse me, a gentleman in the back is asking a question.
You guys have done the assessment. I mean, have you any ideas on what sort of projects or anything you could do to maybe treat the river or, you know?
We're just starting this
Yeah.
planning process right now, okay?
It's not a new idea. You said, first of all, you started throwing out the projects.
Right.
Yeah, no,
Right.
we've
We've
been looking at projects right along. We just completed a big project at Hemlock Drive to take care of that, which was a huge issue. We did install that one pipe under Lake Drive there a few years ago. We actually did another smaller project, 2 smaller projects in the last 2 years. So we're continually trying to address these issues. One thing I do like what Jonathan said was about the stream cleaning and snagging. I mean, if we can fix some of our creeks and make them work again, I think that would be a huge. It's not the
That's one
overall,
of
but
the
every
issues,
every little bit helps. I know I've had this discussion with others.
You know, John, the erosion on the creek where we are, you know, right on by Sprout Creek, Fishkill Creek, the erosion with the trees are starting to come down. It's really very dangerous because right now, coming down over the creek where you were kayaking that
Right.
the last flood,
Yeah.
now they're just hanging out over,
I know, yep.
over the creek and have blocked the creek over there.
If
now.
there's, yeah, and I don't know if there's anything we do as far as creek,
Well, stream bank stabilization
Stabilization,
is
yeah.
obviously an eligible activity
Yeah.
there. You can harden, riprap, and different stream bank stabilization.
what I do is I
things
live
can
on
be
a creek
funded under
myself,
this.
but it's getting undercut like that, and I'm working at remediating that, yeah.
John, didn't the DEC tell you that we can't do any stream cleanup because it's a protected stream?
No, they said you can't bring any equipment, you can only do whatever you can do by hand. That was the issue we had with getting a permit. Yeah.
Is that still current and true, because by hand?
Well, I'll say,
No, you can get permitting for doing.
well,
for
the problem
doing
with the
more.
Fishkill Creek is because there is such a sensitive buffer area there, the wetlands all around. They said you can't go into the wetlands with equipment. But there's been some changes up at DEC. There's a new gentleman in permitting now. And we actually had a meeting on some other issues a while back. And it sounds like they're starting to think a little bit.
Clean up the creek because it's very, very.
But, you know, this really is a regional problem. It's not just East Fishkill, but certainly we're looking at.
Is there going to be a potential, maybe you can answer this, is the other towns looking into a hazard mitigation plan as well?
Dutchess County actually is trying to pull all the towns into one, yeah.
As John said, this was originally supposed to be a planning project with this and 5 other communities
Yeah.
in this area. Wappingers Falls is some different ones, and it just didn't work that way. The gentleman over here has a question.
Yeah, first I want to say, lived in town for 2 years, and everything's going very well. We bought a house over at Creek Bend Road. And I don't fall into either one of your scenarios, but my question is, for like erosion control, you know anybody ever to get a grant for that?
Now, what do you mean by erosion?
All I
What's,
did last year was I had an elevation survey done,
Mhm.
so it kind of took me out of the flood zone by a few feet.
right,
But from like the back of my house to like the creek is like 20 feet.
okay.
And it's like just over the last year, I watched the erosion.
More erosion going in?
Yeah, and then I start to see like the snow coming off the back of the house.
Okay.
So, I don't know if
That's
they give grants for.
stream bank, well, stream bank stabilization,
Yeah.
which just basically is what you can imagine. It's hardening the bank there. Without changing the dynamics of the water course, it's just protecting the bank from getting, you can get grant funding for that.
Now, let me just ask on that one, Jonathan, and that brings to us, we have a resident who suffered significant damage in the last few storms, especially, and at much higher elevation, but a lot of the bank is eroding away. Can they make an application, if we do have this FEMA-approved plan, can the private parties or the town on behalf of them make an application
The town on
for
behalf of the,
stabilization of these issues?
yes, of course, it has to be shown to be cost effective, that
Yeah.
benefits and stuff like that. That's sometimes the trick with a stream bank stabilization, because you have to look at what's the rate of decay, and then how long will it take till it starts to cause, you know, damage to your, not just, but it can be done. But yes, well, one thing about these grants, and that's a good thing that this is a FEMA grant programs. The state is the administrator of the grant programs within New York State. Ultimately, the state is the applicant to FEMA. The town, the municipality, is the sub-applicant. Private property owners cannot be applicants. They are applicants. The town is an applicant on your behalf. That's an important point. So.
Okay. See what happens.
I just have an issue. I live right around the corner here off the Creekside Road. My house is basically dug down to the creek. It's been that way for years. I've never had flood, but I do carry flood insurance, just for, you know, just FYI. But I actually got a notice to my house about this meeting tonight. And I was trying to figure out, is there something going on that will affect me, even though I've never...
No, I think we only gave notices to people who we, because when we just started this project just a month ago or so, we asked FEMA to give us the list of all the policy holders, the claim history, and the rep loss properties. And we said that, well, let's just get the word out, not through the paper and stuff like that, but let's give everybody who we know, and we said NFIP policy holders. So I don't know how you, if you're not a policy holder, oh, you are a policy holder.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we just said policy holders. You didn't have to have a claim history. First we were saying should be people with claims, should be rep loss people. We said, let's just because then people wouldn't get invited.
I got the letter because I have...
You're a policy.
Just because you have a policy.
That's the list we used, okay?
I'd just like to add something to that. We have about 15 to 18 feet of our property, which is actually underwater, with, you know, with the flooding. And I am concerned about what this gentleman said about land erosion.
Right.
Because at a certain point, we're not in a flood zone, we, you know, 50 and a 100-year flood kind of put us out, and we got the insurance
Right.
as a just in case. But at one point, if the water did come up, it would plateau, and our basement, we would be in water at that point.
Right.
So it's not like we have, say, 100 feet or, you know, 125 feet to go before we're flooded.
Right.
It's less than that. But, so we're seeing land erosion, you know, land erosion, we want to do something, we want something done about that.
Right.
And the whole park, meanwhile, is underwater, except for the gazebo, there's a foot of land or not a gazebo, but the whole thing, we have pictures of all that, from both the floods. So that's our concern, but we can.
Well, I mean, stream bank stabilization is a viable mitigation option. It's fundable, but again, you have to show benefit versus cost. The cost of the project for the benefits. Okay, and we can look at, you know, we want to know about these projects, and we can start to evaluate them. Is it a more regional stream bank stabilization, or is it just behind your house? Okay, those are the things that we would look at.
Would you be willing to do a visit, a site visit to certain locations?
Well, I think
there is going to be a point we're going to be going all around the town.
You know, a tour of the town, but then we want to know about certain
If you
projects.
happen to come back to the Lake City
Oh,
area on Warren Drive, please reach out to me.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sure he's going to be out there. We're going to go all over town,
do
so
that.
we'll
We can
give you a
certainly-
holler when we come down.
You're next.
If they ever do machinery in the stream to get out all the debris, which there's plenty, a lot of trees were there.
Right.
And if they're allowed to use machinery, why couldn't they just lower the riverbed?
Well,
And put some that they're taking out on Longlaw side and some on our side, and that'll put the creek down maybe another 3 or 4
Yeah.
feet.
channelization, I'll
Yeah.
tell you, they're not gonna, in general, there's a lot of misunderstanding about changing stream geometries and morphology of streams. And, it's not so simple because everybody says, well, why don't you just drag it out and stuff like that? And then you get a big event, and I'll tell you, we're doing a lot of work through the Catskills right now, and you can see what water does. I mean, you can spend all that time, and it'll bring that stuff right back in. You'll increase the velocity through there, shoot it down, and scour the next person down from you. And this is a lot of the reasons why they have a very strict permitting program on doing things that change the actual geometry of streams, okay? Streams are a natural water course, and they actually, these are processes that happen. So they're very careful about you not allowing you to do things that will just move the problem down to the next person, which is like putting an illegal berm in. Right, right. So this is where, you know, stream bank stabilization, but they take a very careful look at trying to preserve the flow proper flow characteristics of a stream, and not just doing one thing and one thing and just letting the next person down and suffer the problem.
Streams have silted in. We've been up here 42 years. My husband used to stand on a rock in the
Yep.
creek, and now he can stand on that same rock, but he's in silt up to his knees.
Yeah.
That wasn't there before. So that's not actually the natural stream. It's when we had the building boom here in the 2000,
Right.
all that stuff came down. You could see it come down.
Well, that's what's happened with the overdevelopment throughout the county. The developer's supposed to be doing draft environmental impact statement to see how that affects other towns and locations. What's happened in East Fishkill, especially in our area, is that if you do something upstream of us, if you do something downstream of us, it eventually does affect us. For instance, over on Merrick, where they cut the whole mountain out, and put all the homes in up there, once everything runs off the creek, off the mountain, backs the creek up, because that comes back into the Lake City area. The same thing if you're doing stuff north of us. In our location, where we're in Lake City, it's the lowest part of East Fishkill. So it's literally, with the gentleman explained with the floodplains, you have the creek coming in, it's natural for the creek to go into the floodplain. We've seen flooding, and over, like, you've been there 42 years, my family's been here for 35, 40. Same thing, we've seen flooding, but it would be like a period of 10 years before you have like a major flood event. We've had major flood events in the last 4 years. Irene and Lee aside, those were hurricane acts of God, acts of nature. But every single year, April and May, you have snowpack, heavy rain, and the reason why the flooding is getting worse is because of the amount of the overdevelopment throughout the county that's affecting our area. So what this gentleman was explaining with the whole structural elevation mitigation thing, that's the one that's going to be, you have a mitigation plan that hopefully can address what's
All right.
been occurring over the last 10 years.
Yeah, we're going to get wrapping up in a little bit. This is really our kickoff meeting, but if you want to take a few more questions, Jonathan?
Yeah, there's a gentleman in the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to show out a little bit. I mean, all the stories of flooding they definitely emphasize with. I wonder how the hazard mitigation plan, you know, if you're going to do effective flood control, you really got to look at it from a watershed perspective rather than just a town perspective.
Right.
We've got a fledgling group in the Fishkill Creek watershed that's been trying to get traction and get going, called the Fishkill Creek Watershed Commission, Consortium or Commission Association. Volunteers.
Okay.
You know, because that's its main problem. It just hasn't had the people to help out to really make that group an effective watershed planning organization. Wabash Creek has one. They've gotten it together. It's made some effects up there and it's made some impacts in a watershed planning type role.
Right.
We're trying to get traction on that in the Fishkill Creek area, and we're dying for lack of volunteers. You know, so I mean, I'd love to see more community volunteers involved in our organization to really help out and to bring, you know, some effort to solving this problem more on a watershed basis. I'm curious to see how, you know, the hazard mitigation plan.
Well, I mean, perhaps you should have a representative of your organization, you know, work with the planning committee more, and because you are a valuable stakeholder. I mean, one thing, it's public outreach, it's also stakeholder outreach, and we're looking for organizations like that who have a good understanding of the areas of thoughts and need support.
And you do have quite a lot of resources regarding data on the creek and all that. So maybe if we could tap into that group and see about bringing some of their information into our hazard mitigation plan,
I
would
mean,
be a great
when we
idea.
look at this hazard mitigation, we understand that water doesn't see the boundaries of East Fishkill. We look at it, we say, what is the watershed that we're in, and what is the, you know, characteristics of the watershed? Who has control? Who are the other communities in the watershed that we have to work with? So.
Oh, yeah, if you submit a letter of intent and plan on doing work before 2013, is that work being covered before that grant?
No, you cannot. The federal grant funding will not pay for work that's done before the grant is awarded. Okay. So that is unfortunately one of the catches of it. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a private property or like public property. They will not, it's a reimbursement program. They will not reimburse you for any work done before the grant is awarded, which means you have a contract, okay? So,
Okay.
a warning on that.
Jonathan, we're going to get moving along. One thing I did want to say is, where do we go from here as far as doing our hazard mitigation plan?
Well,
I mean,
we'll work directly
yeah.
with the planning
we're
committee
gonna-
right now. With regard to the public, I would, one, you have our contact information here, which includes my phone number and emails, and you know the people here. If you're interested in your own personal property or something with acquisitions, I would encourage you to fill out one of these forms so we know who you are. But if you just want to explain what your problem areas are or what you think needs to be done or areas that you want to be looked at or areas that you want us to go visit and look at, you've got our contact information here. It's just reach out to us, okay?
And Jonathan, on that form, I know it says acquisitions or elevation, but we could just use that if people have any other questions.
Write in what,
Just let us know what your
stream bank
problems are
stabilization, write
on
in
that.
whatever your
Yeah,
concern is.
stabilization or what have
Right.
you. And just ignore the acquisition, the elevation part, so we'll know what your problem is. And as we get along with this project, also, we're going to be posting it on the website.
Make a public
and
webpage off this.
I think we're probably going to have other, I would say we should have a couple update meetings
Oh,
with
we
the
will,
public,
yes.
town board meetings to let you know where we are. If you have any more questions, we'll make ourselves available to answer them. But we will be working on this project for the next few months to get this thing going.
We all get votes until it's fixed.
What's that?
We all get votes until it's fixed.
Sure.
As per, after we have the hazard mitigation plan in place,
Yes.
how about anything that's in that report can be fixed or mitigated?
Right.
What happens if, after that's done, we come up with new hazards?
That's
Do we have
fine.
to have a new
Written in the
hazard?
plan, this is supposed to be a living document. It's not supposed to be static on the shelf. It has to be updated formally every 5 years. But we will build into it a annual review that we'll sit and say, what has happened? What progress have we made? Have we identified any new projects? We write a quick report, we send that into FEMA, okay? So that, as I said, the project has to be in your thing. We're not gonna find all the projects,
Right.
or some new issue could come up, or even a new hazard, or after a new disaster event, we're gonna say, you know, we need to look at this.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
yeah,
so
there
one
is,
plan,
written
and we
into the
add to
plan is a maintenance plan, okay? Which allows you to keep it
Keep it
current.
updated.
Very good, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I live in the Lake City area, and I was wondering, you know, I've been paying insurance, and it's starting to strangle me now. You know, I'm on a pension, and, you know, things are getting tight, the economy. I was wondering if the town give me a tax break so I can pay for my insurance, my flood insurance, because it's getting kind of high. And, you know, maybe until the powers that be figure out what they're gonna do, will I die first?
No, you're not going to die first, and no, we're not going to give you a tax break, but let us work together, because if we could lower the premiums, it'll help everybody out. You know, you tried. But, you know, just for your information, about 10 years ago, our fire department got together with our building department, and we did an analysis of availability of water. We actually lowered our fire rating from a 9 to a 5 for the insurance company, whatever that means, so I hope we got a break on that one anyway. But these are the kinds of things that we're trying to do.
Take care.
What's that, John? No.
I can't agree.
All righty.
Lady down here?
Yes.
Along that same line, we recently had to drop our flood insurance because our bank was demanding that we get some sort of a certification letter that required us to hire an engineer for like $1,500 to certify that we were in a flood zone.
Okay.
And only like 1 square foot of our property is not in a flood zone.
So how could they say
No.
that? Yeah. I think.
Of course, we get the letter done by then.
Oh, no.
Is there something that the town can provide?
No, I think, did we, well, the new flood maps haven't been approved yet, have
We're
they?
At the next town board meeting in 2 weeks, we're updating the
We just got new maps.
floodplain law, and the new maps are there, which hopefully is more specific. They came from DEC and FEMA.
Now, would they come into the town hall and take a
And if the
look?
property is clearly on there, we'd be able to give a certification.
We could give you a letter saying that you're clearly in a
So that would be
floodplain.
a certification acceptable, you think?
I believe so.
Are they asking for an elevation certificate?
Some kind of certificate.
that you're,
if you could send me, I'd be glad to take a look at what they
Okay.
sent you. So if you could, you got my email, and just
And then
send
the
it.
one has the nerve to say to me, oh, well, you were certified in this, and so for all these years that you've lived there, you got a break because you're really in this one. I was like,
yeah. All right, well,
wow, not once was I able to file any claim at all through the flood insurance.
yeah.
Even though I had damage.
Yeah.
I why I was paying for it anyway, so that's why I said, fine.
Well, if you have damage and you have flood insurance, you can file claims. So.
Well, let's see what happens. We will be adopting the new maps at the next meeting, so. All right, so this is a kickoff to our hazard mitigation plan. We'll keep you involved. If anybody's got any questions, please fill out the form, ignore the acquisition or the elevation, and let us know what your problems are, and we'll work together on this. All right? Great. The maps we've had.
The maps.
Thank you very much.
You can come in there downstairs, the new maps.
Oh, I forgot. We're going to ask.